Wizards of the Coast has released their first draft of the new bracket system that's going to police how you have fun and soft ban half of your Commander collection, so it falls to me, Magic's resident hater, to stand up, speak loudly, and warn all of you that it's pretty awesome, and I think all the people hating on it are arguing just to feel something. If you don't know what system I'm talking about, there will be a link to the relevant Wizards article and graphics in the video description, but we will do a speed run explanation now before moving into some of the online criticisms I've already seen, why they suck, and what my totally cool and reasonable criticisms are. The bracket system is a rough power level framework meant to help guide matchmaking for people trying to play Commander with other people that they don't know. They put out a graphic that has a number of hard criteria about what constitutes a deck in what bracket, but the article also has a number of explanations for the play patterns and game lengths that they expect for each of the brackets. They have also published their initial list of game changers, which are cards they are designating as either very powerful or very likely to get you signed up for free molar removal at your next Friday Night Magic. These cards can move your deck up a bracket just by including them. Currently, this list is mostly generic value engines, unless you're green, tutors, unless you're green, and a Family Feud-esque survey of any blue card that has ever hurt someone's feelings. Like, was the criteria for being on the committee owning a shrubbery? What is happening here? Out of the gate, I've seen a ton of comments talking about how because this is focused mostly on generic good stuff cards, it's going to be totally useless as a matchmaking system. This is normally accompanied by some throwaway line about how their Sauron deck totally deserves the One Ring because of lore reasons and it's not that powerful, and come on, you guys! And so this is where we're launching our first rebuttal. The closest thing I have to a job right now is dissecting, denigrating, and fixing Commander decks sent in to me by my audience, who is made up primarily of new players, relatively uninformed Commander players, or players that used to play Magic but have gotten in after a long hiatus and don't understand what all this pant-laza talk is about. And overwhelmingly, the number one problem I see with all of these decks is that they'll begin building something that has a little bit of a theme going, realize it's not working well, and then slam in one of these game changers in the hopes that it fixes everything. And while it may make the deck function better, it totally ruins the vibe. Which leads me to believe that many of this system's noisy opponents are people that fall into one of two categories. First, you envision yourself as a cool or creative deck builder, and you are read to filth as somebody who only builds 3s or 4s, and you are very resistant to accepting that maybe, just maybe, your very cool and very specific theme deck did in fact get lobotomized by your inclusion of Rhystic Study and Fast Mana. Group number 2 are the people that avoid staples generally but still build very good decks, thank you very much, and you are offended at being placed in the Weenie Hut Jr. precon bracket, which, you know, honestly, I'm gonna talk my shit early. I kind of get that. What in the fuck is happening in bracket 2? Average precon experience? Why don't you just hand me a map to the table and it's gonna say somewhere in Africa? It's fine. They gave turn length expectations. It's fine. So without further ado, let's break down some of the absolute worst criticisms I've seen of this system to highlight what it's doing well. First up, I have this really strong deck, but it's technically a 1. You're lying. Or you just didn't read the accompanying descriptions of what each power bracket is supposed to play like. Either way, there are two important things that inform why almost every criticism like this one can be swept aside by saying, "This isn't about you, David, shut up." The first is understanding who this system is built for. These brackets were constructed largely for the new player, or the player who doesn't get to play a lot of Magic outside the occasional FNM or convention and very much does not want to get pantsed by Joseph in his $3,000 Kenrith deck. This is not a tool to refine the meta of your existing playgroup that is already having a pretty good time. This is language and definitions to help Joey Crabshack start and participate in a Rule Zero conversation without deeper knowledge of the Commander metagame and without having watched any videos about the latest spicy Commander tech. The natural downside of the broad accessibility of this system is going to be a lack of specificity. Decks that have strong synergies, good pilots, or even just build a mana curve instead of the standard issue mana brick are always going to outperform their criteria-based rating. It's a very useful tool for framing the Rule Zero conversation, but it does still fall to you to say that while you may not be playing any game changers or infinites, your deck could still maybe be considered a 3 on account of the fact that it will violently dismember the table by turn 5 if nobody interacts with you. This connects to the second important quality, which is that this is a grab bag of information to start your Rule Zero conversation with, not a Dragon Ball Z power scanner that can concretely identify how strong your deck is. Not only is it not that, it is so astoundingly comprehensive in its failure to describe the strength of any deck with a strategy that is even remotely more focused than, hey man, these cards are good, that the only good faith conclusion I can draw from it is that they fumbled that particular ball on purpose. They accepted that there was no way to realistically compress all of the different qualities that go into a good commander deck into a linear scale, and so they just threw their hands up. Obviously, this means the system isn't perfect. Shocker. But I am approaching this as bowling alley guardrails for children who want to throw around some balls. And it is goddamned good at that. But that hasn't stopped some people online from immediately taking the stance that the entire thing is laughable because their laser-etched diamond core bowling ball with internal gyrometer could take unfair advantage of these guardrails and isn't technically against the rules. Yes, of course you can. You know what else you can do? You can go down to the park and begin pushing children off of gymnasium slides and then email the city council about how irresponsible they are for not including safety harnesses, you stupid fucking prick. But I'm getting a little carried away. The point is that while the lack of quantifiable differences between bracket 1 and bracket 2 are a legitimate weakness of the system, reacting to that weakness by going, well, check out this crazy bracket 1 deck I built, is humorless head so far up your own ass you cannot even smell the fart anymore Ben Shapiro bullshit. And whatever deck you came up with is definitely covered by the elaboration they made on the brackets in the article. Your Eldrazi deck's a 1? Really? You didn't pick any cards in it because they're functional and it regularly takes more than 10 turns to end a game? You expect me to believe there is some secret theme behind you efficiently ramping into every Titan in the game? If that's the hill you want to die on, fine, but for the love of God, stay dead. I am sympathetic to the notion that most of us are simply much more comfortable being wrapped in the loving arms of cold mathematical facts when it comes to determining what behaviors are acceptable or not. But we cannot ignore the qualitative, and certainly not to the point that we just refuse to acknowledge that basically every complete sentence Wizards of the Coast has said about brackets 1 and 2 make it crystal clear that to be in bracket 1, you have to be doing some goofy shit, and to be in bracket 2, you're still taking your time. Now, I don't find every criticism as ridiculous as I find that particular one. There are even some I mostly agree with, like where the hell is deflecting SWAT? Or feel free to insert whatever card beat your pet deck last. But I am with you. I think there are a ton of cards that arguably deserve a place on this list, and I think it was completely tone deaf of Gavin Verhey to say that if anybody suggested changes to it, that he would gun them down in the street and then put their name on the Game Changers list under the category Idiot Losers. I mean, it was just...
Boss, if you could just check this sheet we gave you.
What? They didn't do that? And they, in the article they wrote, they asked for public feedback. Dale, we're trying to film a YouTube video here. Could you be a team player for once? Moving on, we have the idea that this should be a point system, a tiered classification system, or really any version of this that is more granular than the one we have, usually stemming from the belief that whatever game changer you think is the weakest doesn't belong on the same list as whatever game changer you think is the strongest. And this is actually the critique that upsets me the most, because holy shit is this so wrong. I am talking let's put out the fire in the kitchen with this handy bottle of grease wrong. I am talking my knees hurt so I massaged them with a shotgun blast wrong. I could make an entire video just about this, but I don't think 30 minutes of me screaming fuck would have great retention. Instead of that, let's talk about the nugget of reasonability that this criticism is built around. Point systems do work well in balancing 1v1 games. We've seen it on Magic the Gathering Arena, we've seen it in Canadian Highlander, and we've seen it in army builder games like Warhammer. But in these games, the play pattern is very, very tightly focused on ending your opponent's life, and the impact of individual cards on that outcome are much easier to quantify. Commander is different. Its play patterns are much more flexible, not only because of the 100 card singleton rules, but also because for most people, it's primarily a social game where we just happen to all be trying to kill Edward. He knows what he did. Winning should always be a priority in Commander. Yugi help you if it is not, but it is typically not the only priority, and at many Commander tables, it's not the first one. And social aspects aside, the multiplayer variability of Commander really muddies the water when it comes to trying to nail down how good a card is with any degree of precision. For this example, I'm going to use Rhystic Study and Trouble in Pairs. We all know that Rhystic Study and Trouble in Pairs are both good value engines. I hope. And we know immediately that Rhystic Study is better than Trouble in Pairs. I fucking hope. But everything begins to spiral as soon as we try to define exactly how much better Rhystic Study is than Trouble in Pairs, or any other value engine, or any other card, because every card exists in the context of a deck, not only the one you put it in, but the decks that it is playing against that you typically have little to no control over. For instance, Bojuka Bog is a prime example of a card that is either completely irrelevant or absolutely backbreaking, depending on if you are playing against a graveyard deck. And while most cards have much more consistent payoffs than something like Bojuka Bog, every card exists on some type of spectrum on how good the payoff actually is compared to what you expected, and trying to give it an average value of goodness is going to leave you with a standard deviation of goodness that is so large you will be left with more contradictions and caveats than you will useful classifications. Unfortunately, the average Magic player's brain has been so thoroughly poisoned by a lifetime of the information surrounding this game being limited to things that say, here are the top 5 dingle dangles for your dongle deck, buy now, that there is going to be a great resistance to, for once, not ranking something and simply leaving the conversation at, hey, is that card good? Oh wow, that card's pretty good. Or, oh no, that card is terrible, but it's going to go great in my dog prom deck. That is going to be a tough mindset shift for some people, but I promise that it will be universally better for everyone that can make it. But isn't this just creating sub-formats that people will now try to optimize their decks around? It's important to note that this comment was made specifically with reference to Bracket 3 and the idea that if you have one game changer, you are at a distinct disadvantage for not bringing 2 additional game changers just for the sake of hitting the limit. I am not talking about people who are ignoring the qualitative descriptors of Brackets 1 and 2, which are admittedly light on quantitative criteria, so all of you bad faith Zada playing dipshits, shoot, get out of here. With respect to Bracket 3 specifically, and with people moving from Bracket 3 to 4 and just opening up anything in their decks, I think this is a massive win, and I realize that may come as a surprise given that I am a known staple hater, but I hate staples because of my current place in the Commander pipeline, which is broadly, you purchase a precon, then you upgrade that precon, then you try to build your own deck. That deck either ends up having way too many staples or it has way too many no reason combos, then you get bored, and then you become a hipster who only plays organic, free-range theme decks that all have a QR code on the back explaining exactly why this somewhat good card has a narrative justification for being in the deck. And although I enjoy my position on that pipeline, I still have room in my heart to appreciate the joy in a new player's face the first time they get to resolve the One Ring. Much in the way I am pro gun control and can still enjoy a day at the shooting range, strong cards are fun in their own right. I got bored of them, but I don't expect everybody else to, and I think particularly for the new player, this type of controlled and more thorough exposure to how powerful cards power up the overall level of your deck is only going to be a good thing. But if I made a video that didn't throw any shade at Wizards, my soul would be dragged back to hell. So let's talk about why this system is a massive steaming dumpster fire, starting with the missing bracket, or as I like to call it, the precon problem. I'll be honest, at this point I've seen an argument for why every single jump from bracket to bracket is too big and needs another bracket in between, but the one that affects me personally, and therefore the only one that matters, is the jump between 2 and 3. In addition to its criteria, bracket 2 is described as the average precon experience, while in bracket 3, 2-card game-winning infinites are fine as long as we're on turn 7 or later. And I don't know about you, but to me, the concept that the distance between the average precon and playing land drops into Niv Mizzet plus Curiosity and a free counterspell to protect it is the same as the distance between that and, hey, combo earlier, is a ridiculous overstatement of how strong the average precon is. But they put in a caveat. They said modern precon, which only makes me angrier because I looked at the Aetherdrift precons. Those bitches can barely play show and tell, let alone magic. I tried playtesting that energy precon. 8 turns in, I pretended I had omniscience and drew 14 cards for free just to feel something. You know what happened? I put 6 damage on the stack and board wiped myself. The average precon experience is a mess in most individual sets, let alone once you try to bridge between sets. Lock the Valgavoth precon and the Miss Bumbleflower precon in a room together, you are never getting those bloodstains out. There are some precons that reach a level where the jump between 2 and 3 begins to seem not ridiculous. Your Hawkballs, your Lathrils, your Prospers. And I think it would have been much better if they had simply stood on a smaller subsection of 5 to 10 precons that they define as peak precon performance and tied bracket 2 to that. It would have given bracket 1 the breathing room to exist as anything other than a meme label, and it would have made the jump between bracket 2 and 3 feel less like being ripped from a 50-year coma. Another issue that is less of a current criticism and more of an anxiety moving forward is the broad lack of guidance we're getting on game changers in the command zone, of which there are going to be a lot. They did pay us the lip service of saying, well, if you're a CEDH Hall of Famer or an archetypal feels bad control commander, yeah, sure, you're a game changer, but everything else is the same, I guess? They do get more grace than that because this whole thing is very complicated and it seems like they're trying to do too little rather than do too much right at the beginning so that they can get good feedback, but I am still very nervous about it. The command zone obviously has a disproportionate impact on how your deck is going to play because anything in there came pre-tutored and you allegedly built your deck around it. And there are a good number of commanders that just so happen to kind of build themselves if you know anything about Magic or have access to EDHREC.com. And I don't mean that in a good way. I'm looking at you, Voja. This is dealt with to some degree by cross-referencing your commander with the turn length expectations that they've laid out for each of the brackets. However, there's still a lot of gray area and a lot of very, very powerful gray area. I worry that if we don't do a better job of accounting for what's happening in the command zone than this current list, we are going to end up with a system that is too inaccurate to be worth adopting. However, I can also see why they've kept it so short. Any criteria I can think of to change what we include on the game changers but commander list is immediately going to put 50 new commanders onto the list and spawn 5 months of internet argument about whether that legendary was even good in the first place. I don't think it's impossible, and I do have a decent degree of faith in the committee to handle it, but I do think it's going to have to involve some sort of reckoning with, wow, we print a lot of fucked up cards, huh? At this point, you may be feeling like we're all over dramatizing something that really doesn't affect you that much if you have a constant play group or don't play with randoms that often, and I'm going to keep it simple for why you should care. They're going to unban a ton of shit. I'm not going to make any bold predictions in this video about specifically what they're going to unban. That's a different video with different ad revenue, but I do know that every single free my guy you've ever heard is currently on the table as Wizards attempts to find a way to justify why they're just a game changer. Or, and I hope to God that the monkey's paw is not curling as I say this, a game changer for some type of card that you can only have one of or can only play in bracket 4. So even if you don't plan to use this system personally, I probably won't, even though I do think it's quite good, I am setting my watch for about 6 to 8 weeks until this totally upends the landscape of what is legal in Commander if it does get any traction. I understand this video has been quite different from my regular content, so just would after like 30 years can we please thank you. So make sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy this so that it does not take a 20-hour manic phase for me to do the next one.